Okay, episode 19 of New York City Bike Culture. Sitting here today, well, spring's coming. Sitting here, we're super excited. We could even almost take our jackets off. Sitting here with JP Partland, who just rode his bike down here from Harlem.
Central Harlem, yeah.
Yeah, Central Harlem. Grew up New York City adjacent, but has lived in the city for a long time. Has written books about biking, cycling in the city, has written other books about cycling, 4 books altogether. I think your website says like hundreds of articles. I'm just going to countless articles and other pieces about cycling, but not only cycling, I'm sure.
Yes.
I am a freelance writer and ex-cyclist, like obviously writes for Casina. You can see the little Casina colors here, the little neck buff, yeah. And I met him first while racing, and there's something about people you can kind of notice that there's a little bit something beyond the surface, and they're just not your regular racer. And I felt that with JP immediately. Yeah, no pressure now, no pressure. And I've heard a lot of good things about him. I heard well, given one of the books that you've written, you have to know all the routes in New York City, but I have heard a lot about your route knowledge in New York City and how you take people on back road adventures, especially up in Westchester County, I think, where a lot of people have including me, have had terrible experiences and no knowledge of the local roads and routes. But I'm gonna let you do, and I think that's kind of what I want to say from my end. So we'll talk a lot about bikes and also writing about bikes, and also maybe Casina, because you're the first person from Casina here.
Woohoo!
Exactly, you got to represent. I'm obviously a little CRCA biased, which is it's a bigger club, but we'll talk about that. But I'll let you do kind of an introduction of yourself from your point of view. What do we need to know about JP Partland?
Well, it's like you want to talk about yourself, and then when you're put on the spot, you have no idea what to say. I've had spent too much time reading, writing, and riding my bike, I think, and they're obsessive habits that I think I've had for too long, and I probably, if I'd been smarter, I would have given up on all of them a long time ago, is what it gets down to. But they worked. I think, like, just as an example, when I was in college, I was riding, and I ended up doing like 100 miles most Sundays in college.
Wow.
Because it was 15 miles to meet up with some people. I was out of South Philadelphia, so it was like 15, 16 miles to meet up with people in Philadelphia. And then we'd ride another 8 or so, I think it was 8, I don't remember, to Chestnut Hill.
Yeah.
And then we met a group, and then that group did like 40 to 60 miles.
Yep.
And then I'd ride home, and then when I was done, it was like, well, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna eat as much food as I can and spend the rest of the afternoon reading the New York Times. And it was a wonderful rhythm, and probably
Those were your Sundays.
That was my Sunday for much of like the fall and the winter, and for 4 years, and it was good. But the bike riding goes back to when I moved out of the city, actually, because I moved to a suburban town and didn't know anyone, and wasn't making friends, so I had a cheap hand-me-down bike, and my parents put a little cyclometer, and I'm so old, these cyclometers have this little click thing that will go around.
Yeah.
And I rode like a mile or two every day after school, just getting to know the neighborhood.
So this is in high school still? Or?
I was 8.
You're okay. We're talking elementary school. So your parents, you had grown up a little bit in the city, but your parents moved out. You obviously then grew up in
suburbia.
I haven't seen like kind of the proper American dream suburbia. Other places I always find New York City suburbia very different than people imagine it might be. But yes, New York City suburbia.
It's a funny thing. I hadn't thought of that, but a friend of mine who's from Texas says, like, when he looks at Austin, he's like, those are suburbs. This is towns. And it's it's sort of an interesting thing, I think, because it's ultimately, it's probably good for riding in the sense that the geography here was settled when people moved here when cars weren't prevalent. And so there were towns, and there were discrete towns, and then you would have roads joining the towns. And then the trains came in, and that created bigger towns, and then eventually the roads. But if you go to sort of my bête noire is Florida, and
there's a lot of New Yorkers down there right now.
I know.
And I'm always like, I know it's warm, but oh my God, no please.
No thanks.
No, thank you. No.
And there they built with the car being the primary mode of transportation. So it's like interstate to highway to commercial highway to super busy road to moderately busy road to cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And so it's a drag because wherever you go, you have all these, you have to go from your cul-de-sac to the moderately busy road to the busy road to find more moderately busy roads.
Yep.
And so this stuff, this is what I'm used to, and it's common for the Northeast and other.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Arizona 4 years where I kind of really got into biking and riding, and it's very similar to Florida. And like a lot of times, there's only one road between town A and town B because again, like it was built for the car, and why do you need another road, right? There's no other farms in between. It's a desert, so fair enough.
Right.
Versus in Pennsylvania, like every little farm out there in the middle of nowhere has like 2 roads going to it,
Right.
and you're like, it's paved. I mean, you can go anywhere and everywhere, and it's similar here, I think.
Yeah.
But coming back to yours, so
I
you're
started
8 years,
riding.
you're in the New York City suburbs.
So I was 8 years in the city, 8 years in the suburb, 4 years in college, 4 years back in suburbs, and then I've been in the city for 26 years, I think, 25 years. So I was riding as a kid, and the next big step was in 7th grade, where switched schools because it was junior high, and again, there I was riding my bike to school, so I was a bike commuter, which I thought at the time, I was like, man, I could do this. I don't want a car. I could do this for a long time. And the school was downhill, so I'd race the cars downhill. And it was enough of a hill, or I'd like to pretend I was enough of a cyclist, that I could keep up with the cars. And it was a lot of fun. I hit a car once, which wasn't good, and then I had a couple bad crashes my parents hated, and then I would race my friends home after school, and then if there was nothing to do, go for a bike ride. So then that just spiraled into getting Bicycle Magazine, and I did like a lot of guys around here my age, did the Pepsi Challenge Bike Marathon.
Yeah, I heard a lot about that. Well, it's kind of gotten lost, but I've recently had a couple of people bring it up, and there was somebody shared an article about somebody setting the 24-hour record there, like in 85 or something.
It was 80, maybe it was 85, but both years I did it, it was like 82, 83, 83, 84, or anyways, it was in that range. It must have been 82, 83.
This was a big thing back then.
Yeah, and so it was considered a patch ride by the AYH, so there are patches. I think my patches are somewhere.
Yeah.
And you would go and you'd wear this bib, and every lap they'd put a little rubber stamp on your bib. And the guy who was setting the record had, when Toga had a race team, he hired the Toga guy.
Toga's a bicycle shop. Yeah.
Toga's a bike shop.
In northwest of the city,
And the Toga guy who ran at Lenny had a very serious race team, National Class Racers, and I assumed that those guys were hired out to pace. It was first this model guy, and then it was John Howard. John Howard rode like 520 miles in Central Park. And I'll say the second year I drafted him for like an hour in it, but the people were not happy I was doing it. But because I was 13, I guess, and a stupid kid on a too big bike. It was not like in the rain as well.
I think that's the year I read about it. It was like pouring or something like that too, and he managed to get the record. And I think I've brought this up already, but he put in like a catheter for like the last hours, and you're just like,
I think he rode the whole time with a catheter.
This is serious. Like this was the technology of the day that he used.
And it was so. Anyways, I did that. I did bike touring. I got into bike racing, and it's just like I feel like I kind of added a new trick every so often to keep things interesting. I started mountain biking in '87, I guess in '85.
Oh, so that's the early years of mountain biking.
I mean, to me, it felt like I was kind of second wave because my friends who were doing it for the first wave, they were doing like 82 thereabouts. They started.
Yeah, but in retrospect, you're still like on a bike without any dampening, and you're just getting bounced off the hill by the hill. So there's some really good like late '80s, early '90s videos where nobody has any shocks yet, and people are just going places that the terrain dictates and not they have no control.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Actually, one of my friends who was an early MTV guy, I probably said this too many times about him, and he might disagree. His bike handling was so good that when suspension forks came around, he was hurt by it because the people without the skills could keep up all of a sudden.
Plow through it a little bit.
You definitely had to be more careful about how you picked your lines and where you went, and and then I think ironically, as a result, the trails have gotten tougher again because now that everyone's suspension, well, the trails are too easy.
Yeah, you can go through all kinds of rocks now that you couldn't back in the day. Yeah.
So that's been a thing. And then I picked up cyclocross in '87 as well because my bike club needed, I guess they still do, but you needed to put on a race to keep your USA cycling.
I think that came up the other day. I think that's, I was thinking about it. I think that's determined by the local area associations now or something. Because back in Arizona, I think they softened it up and they said, well, it's okay to call this or something. Anyway, but
so we had to put on a race. So the only thing we were running out of time, we put on a cyclocross race at Round Cove Community College. And also because cyclocross bikes were almost non-existent in the United States, I had the sport touring bike I used for touring, and in the Pepsi Challenge, I found 27 millimeter tires that just fit under side pull brakes.
So what people ride standard now on the road? Yeah.
And you look at me like, I can't believe it. And then, I eventually worked my way up to a cross bike. But and then in the early 2000s, I picked up track racing.
Okay.
And then I got a power meter. It's like each of these things was like, oh, a new thing, and it rejuvenated and reinvigorated, and I felt I got a little better.
That helped, like riding those kind of waves, the mountain bike.
Yeah.
I think you've maybe missed out on some of that like artistic riding. Like what is that called? It's quite popular in Germany actually. I think the Germans always clean up the medals there.
It is.
Where they also have the thing where you can kick a goal, like it's basically soccer with a bike.
There's bicycle soccer, and it is artistic bike riding. And there was a woman actually I met who was a world champion in it.
Yeah.
It's a UCI event, which a lot of people don't realize. They have these crazy looking bikes where they design the front end. It's a super steep angle, but the wheel can do a 360. Yep. And she was visiting New York, and I was doing a learn to ride bike class. Yeah. And she had called up Bike New York, like, hey, I want to help out. And she just showed up and introduced herself. I'm trying to remember her name. And she's helping, and then in the spare time, she just hops on a friend's bike and is like going around the schoolyard, standing on his stem and saddle.
Yeah, it's impressive. Because it's like basically gymnastics, but on a moving bike. Yeah.
So I didn't do that, and
you didn't do that. You did. As we're like pointing out what you haven't done, we should really point out everything that you have done. But I guess you missed out on BMX, maybe.
I had a BMX bike, but it was stolen before I raced it.
Okay.
And I did a sport, so effectively I had a jury rigged fat bike. Because they didn't have fat bikes then, and so there was this guy in Alaska who'd make these double wide rims. Yeah. They'd take two 26-inch rims, both 32 spoke, and he'd cut the one wall off each and then weld them together. And so I was told the only way I could do Sport was if I had this. So I bought the rims, got some Dior XT hubs, built them up, put Fisher Fat Tracks 2.2 tires, and I was told you had to glue the sidewall, one of the sidewalls, so that it wouldn't move with the low pressure. So I did that. Anyways, I did the race in the snow, and I'll say for people who haven't tried fat bikes.
So you went all the way out to Alaska?
Yeah. Flew out to Alaska.
Wow.
And it is so much more stable on the fat bikes on ice.
Yes.
Which, having done this before fat bikes, it was like the start of the race is you ride across a lake, and then you go out to the woods, and then you're on a river eventually, and then you come back across the lake. But the river, they basically beat a trail down with snow machines, some of us, but the lake is basically ice. And it was no problem. When I started that thing, I basically attacked because I figured, well, I might as well get the first one onto the snow. And, so I went off, and it was, anyways. So it was a crazy experience, that and the fat bike. So I've done fat biking.
So Anchorage, in Alaska, that's like one of those places where that's like where you actually can see that fat bikes have a place and have a reason to, they exist for a reason, and they aren't just a toy, which they are, a fun toy. But
no, I'm good for now.
Do you want ketchup, hot sauce?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. No, thank you.
Ketchup would be great. Actually, hot sauce would be better.
Hot sauce. Okay.
There we go. So you've tried it. We can fairly safely say you've tried almost everything. So what was it that drew you to it? Was it sounded like a little bit of the competition. I think you're not really a gearhead, but you don't mind that part of it either. I would say. I mean, there's other people who are like all about it, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
You can tell me. And but you certainly race, so the competition is part of it, but you also commute and you also write about it, and you love everything about it. Like, what is it like? Is it what a lot of people like, that kind of sense of being out there and free and like being with your thoughts and meeting people? Like, what are the elements that drive you to it?
The first thing is, I guess I am a bit of a gearhead because I professionally for many years I was doing copyright for the bike industry. So one of the first thing I did for competitive cyclists was I did a brochure on how to use a power meter.
Okay.
So, and then the next year I did actually a brochure on how to use an
competitive cyclist is still one of the main kind of bike online. Well, now they do online bike networks and catalog, I'm sure. Distributors, sales places. Yeah.
So at the time, Competitive Cyclist was an upstart e-tailer based in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Okay.
Run by guys who it was basically a side project out of a bike shop. And anyways, they asked me to do this, and so I did that. But I also did an altitude tent brochure, so I could, or whatever, booklet. They're really booklets. So, anyways, and then through that and product reviews, I've done the gearhead thing as well. But having said that, I think I was attracted to the freedom. A lot of people are.
Yeah.
And I think with bike racing, it helped that it was exotic. It was far away. So when I was young, we could not watch it on TV.
Yeah.
Definitely not the internet. And
these are the Greg LeMond days, kind of around there, and when he made it big for the first time, at least in the US. But there's stories of where it was like really a niche sport when Keith Hennig came up in it. And,
So for people who were into it my age, one of the big things was CBS TV had done these packages of they did Paris-Roubaix and the Tour de France, and they actually won an Emmy for these broadcasts because they were sort of pioneering music video sports events where John Tesh, who we can laugh about because he's a ridiculous composer, scored electronic music to a highlight reel, essentially. And if people go onto TV and you watch 1985 Paris-Roubaix, it's hilarious. And actually, I showed it to my daughter's been watching the Tour de France with me this last year, and she's now coming in to see me. She's like, I bet there's some bike racing on the internet we can watch. And so we'll watch, we're watching a highlight reel for the UAE tour right now. But so she's watched all these things with me, and she's 9, and so since she's been watching them, and one of the things she loved, which seemed like a gateway drug for parents, is there's a scene where Tom Dumoulin has to take a poop by the side of the road on his way to winning the Giro, and my daughter was asking me what's interesting. And and I was thinking, well, how can I make this exciting? And hey, poop's exciting to everyone. So
9-year-olds are into that usually. Yeah.
So she's like, can you show me something interesting? So I show her the scene where he's riding along, and the announcer's like, what's happening? She loved it so much. She watched it over and over. She called up her friends, you have to watch this. And so we've been watching together ever since. But having said that, the 85 broadcast, since she's been watching this with me.
Didn't get into any trouble with the other parents?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Not yet. I thought, I'll show you how I saw this. And if you see the 85 Paris-Roubaix broadcast, it looks like another world. It's a gray, awful day in northern France. It's muddy. The buildings look old. Now to us, the bikes look old and ancient. But in that vein, there's a scene where Theo de Roy, who went on to manage the Rabobank team, who was a pro rider and was the rare Dutch rider who was a college graduate and fluent in English.
Yeah, it's very much still is in many ways a working class sport, especially in the Netherlands, Belgium.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's in the breakaway all day, and he's finally knocked out the breakaway 200 kilometers in or something. And he pulls over, and he's done because Van der Aert, his team leader, is in the lead group.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm done. And he just pulls over and he hops into somebody's car to go to the finish, to go to take the cold shower through Bay Velodrome. And somehow the CBS people caught up with him. And they're like, what are you doing, essentially?
Yeah.
And he's like, it's a bunch of shit. You wet your pants, you're riding in shit all day. It's miserable. And they're like, well, would you ever do it again? And he's like, sure, it's the most beautiful race in the world.
Yeah.
So to me, that was hugely appealing.
Yeah.
And my daughter was looking at it, she's like, what? Why would I care about this? So, anyways.
Which is understandable. Yeah.
So the idea that it was far away and it was this thing, and also as someone who wasn't big physically, I'm 5'9", I was 5'9", and that the ball and stick sports were certainly people who were taller and bigger were favored, and so as someone of normal or moderate build, this was something like, oh, I can do this,
all the big four American sports favor the tall and strong, like really big build kind of, right? I mean, basketball, football, hockey, even baseball, right?
Baseball's gotten bigger.
Yeah, it's gotten bigger. You can't be small anymore really there either, by and large. So that totally makes sense. And I think even now cycling is definitely attracting some of the people who have different talents, right? I mean, I always joke, I think when we were at a collegiate team, like I think one day we were like staying overnight for a race somewhere, and we were sleeping in the gym, and we're like, so like here's a basketball, there's a basketball. It was probably one of the worst basketball teams like kind of experience I've seen, because like having a bunch of cyclists trying to play basketball or a team sport with like a ball involved, it wasn't like, let's say we weren't all the biggest talents. So, but it was fun. Like, I mean, I think that's not necessarily the rule, but I think it attracts off a different group of people, and for good reasons, right? I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. So there was that fascination with what you saw, kind of the foreign mystique a little bit, and but the passion that you saw in this guy too, probably, and the muddiness, and then the competition, and then a different sport where you saw people that looked a little bit more like you too.
A little bit,
a little bit, no, they were Belgian and gritty and all, which is probably different, but so that was fun, and then it snowballed from there, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, when I finally figured out there was bike racing in the U.S., which took me a couple years, I got hooked up with the bike club, and I was going out to Nyack when I was 15 or so. And
so you lived in the suburbs,
Nashville,
and you found the bike club ultimately,
but it was fun because you were also hanging out with, you're doing something crazy, hanging out with older people, I guess, which was also part of the fun. And just like, hey, we're riding. It sounds fabulous, and so that kept me going for a while.
Yeah, I think that connection across age groups is. I talked about that the other day with one of the other guests, and that is something that you see where especially when you're younger, you get a chance to connect a lot of people, or even me, like I get to connect to people younger than me, like 10 years more than that, but I get to connect to people that are 10, 20, 30 years older than me too. Yeah. So, and I think you get me. I personally find it interesting because you learn a lot, you see a lot of different perspectives, and it's quite neat to see people in different stages of life and get to see their perspective a little bit. It keeps you grounded in some ways.
Yeah, and it's nice to have. I mean, I don't know if this is how I learned it, but I think when I was in college that cycling helped because it's like, oh, I'm not 100% student. I've got this thing. And of course, when I was working in a bike shop in the summer, it's like, well, I'm not 100% bike guy. I've got this other thing going. And so I think that also helped. That it's like one aspect of my identity, but it felt like it was helping make the world a bigger place and more interesting. And I like that. And so that was certainly a plus.
So, without giving away details about your age, but roughly 30 years later, you still believe that?
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm 52.
I would imagine that this is all kind of like, the lines are very blurred between what's work and what's passion and what's...
That's a bit of a problem.
You work as a freelancer on a lot of different projects. You've written 4 books about cycling and mountain bike, BMX, right? A book on cycling routes in New York City, and then the 4th one escapes me right now, but...
on the Tour de France.
Yes, on the Tour de France. Probably the most well-known one, actually. Yes, sorry.
That's all right.
Because it's not as niche as the other 2, I would say, or maybe niche is a little strong, but they're more specific. Yeah.
Well, I definitely was pitching it as a general interest reader.
Yeah.
And
because I read the reviews and a lot of them were clearly with the more general interest reader in mind. The general, like, let's say even the casual Tour de France kind of audience that the US has in the summer,
right?
And ahead of the land states, especially too, I think.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's a funny thing. I'm sure you had your Lance Armstrong moments or issues.
I'm German, so I had my my Jan Ullrich moments and issues more so, but those are two intertwined. So yes, I had my Lance Armstrong moments.
So for me, it was a story I wanted to tell, and with Lance doing well at the tour, it was like, well, here's the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I mean, my thing is like, well, Lance gathered the crowd for me, and I should do my thing. And so he's on the cover of the book, but when I wrote the book, it was 2005.
Yeah.
Certain aspects.
So he had just won, or was about to win his 7th tour back then.
Yeah. So he was about to, and I went out to France to make sure I had everything right that summer. But the certain doping issues were so prevalent, they were too big to ignore.
Yeah.
So I felt I had to address it. And to me, it was this ironic thing of I felt ethically bound to say that almost certainly doping went on in '99, even based on what we knew in 2005.
Yeah.
And so, but he's on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
And my publicist, for lack of, was a junior publicist handling 23rd Untitled. Because of, I don't know if she read the book, but I'm pretty sure she sent it to Lance's people. Mm-hmm. And the people, and I would like to believe that the people at Bicycling and Velo News and whatnot were a little reluctant to review it as a result, but I don't know for sure. So, anyways, it was.
So you think the tide had already turned in the mainstream media, and people had gotten wary of them, or
no, they were afraid to cross him, I think. So
because of what you had written in it.
No, because of they were afraid. Yeah, I mean, it's like if they said, "Oh, he wrote that doping was going on."
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah. So just that even was part of the omerta almost. Already.
I think so. Yeah. I think so. I mean, the guy who was the editor-in-chief of Bicycling at the time was later quoted as saying, "Oh, we all knew Lance was an asshole." It's like, but you put him on the cover, whatever, 10 times. So
people, one of my professors in grad school always used to say, "Well, what does it always come down to? Money." And I think that it's a very simple truth, but I think it is a truth. Mm-hmm. Almost everything looked behind, and with everything around that, I think it almost ultimately comes down to money. And you can call it power, whatever you want to call it, but I say call it money. And there's like talking about YouTube videos, early '90s YouTube videos, where you're very young Lance Armstrong, and already then people were commenting that he was an asshole. Not everybody, but because he was a strong character. Mm-hmm. And but that didn't stop his rise for the obvious talents. And well, we don't want to make this we want to keep this a JP Partland episode, but so maybe we'll do a special on I always say, like, I'd rather not talk. He has enough of an audience still, so I don't want to bring it up. But back to your book. So that didn't sell as well, probably because it didn't get the attention with your hinting at that there was doping going on.
Yeah, well, I think it was hard. I wondered. I don't know for sure, and I understand why they wouldn't possibly sell. Right. And I did, ironically, because the book came out in 2006, so Operation Puerto. Mm-hmm. So it had all these things lined up, and then Operation Puerto broke, and all those things disappeared.
Which is basically the Spanish police finding a bunch of blood bags in a doctor's office that were all very clearly, but still not officially tied to a bunch of high-profile cyclists and other athletes, actually, to other sports, including Jan Ullrich, including people who have recently become world champion in cycling still.
Ivan Basso.
Yeah, Ivan Basso, Valverde, others. Legally speaking, we're not bound legally here, so we can say these things.
Right.
I think legally speaking, we can't claim all of these things because of legal things, but it's pretty much a fact. So that happened, and that was really, a year later.
Right. So, anyways, up and down. And but I still believe in the book. There's actually now an audiobook version.
Oh, wow.
And I did.
Did you read it?
And there's an ebook version too. Yeah. So I updated the book a couple of years ago.
Did you read out loud for the audiobook?
No, there's a a cyclist named Sean Burnett who has a business called Sporty Books, and he's an actor, does a bunch of things, he does voiceover work, I think. So, anyways, it's available on all the platforms. Go find it right away.
Say the title again.
It's Tour Fever: The Armchair Cyclist Guide to the Tour de France.
Yes, Tour Fever, very easy, pretty catchy actually. Like,
got lucky.
You should have gotten it.
So, anyways, it's complicated. So anyways, where were we? The books. So the books are out. And, the difficult thing is right now that nobody reads and everybody reads.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Which is to say that I'm sure people are reading tons, but the way that we've set up our reading and writing universe, it's hard for anyone to actually make money, which then makes it hard for, as it were, the professionals to write. Not that there aren't very good amateur writers, but there's, anyways, it's a bit of a pull. So despite, book publishers did great actually in 2020, but it's still an uphill battle finding people to read. And as maybe because I'm old, I think reading on paper is easier.
Oh,
but
100% if you ask me. But I'm like cusp millennial on the old millennial age, and I don't know if my students would agree, but yeah, absolutely. But in most scenarios, I would say.
So,
yeah.
I'd say read if you get the chance. It's a nice break, and you can recline if it's paper very easily. Anyways, you can also, I know, tablets, but and that also is restful. And for cyclists, hey, get your feet up whenever you can.
Yeah.
If you're not riding, you're recovering.
So that's the So Tour Fever, check that out. And I want to make a transition since we're on the topic of the books. The other two, mountain biking and BMX, are for those niche groups. I think they're interesting too, but I'm really interested in the other one.
Sure, Ride a Bike New York City.
Because, and Ride a Bike is kind of a series of books.
It was originally a series. So it's a funny genesis. The publisher was bicycling Australia.
Wow. Okay.
And the publisher had, for lack of a better description, I think he had conquered the Australian market. And being that he went to high school in the United States, he's an Australian who came to the United States in high school, because his dad was in graduate school, I believe. He's always had an interest in the U.S. bike market. And so he thought, well, how about if we do like a worldwide series of bike guidebooks?
Yeah.
Which the idea in itself, the timing was poor in terms of how technology moved forward.
Yeah.
But
I saw that you came out now with like a downloadable version with all the routes.
I've actually, that's what I'm working on now.
That's really cool, yeah.
So anyways, the idea was, so I was fitting into a format, and it was supposed to be 10 rides per county or borough.
Okay.
And so it's supposed to, and then there'd be 10 rides in Jersey. So it's supposed to be 60 rides. And I mean, really, if like it had been more freeform.
For those not familiar with the area, but I think that's how we split it up really in New York City. We say the 5 boroughs, right? And then you have New Jersey. Do you have something for Long Island too, or
no?
Long Island and Westchester County?
Right. The book doesn't have, but I am subsequently now doing Westchester.
Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, really, and this is the thing about all borders. It's like we have an idea that it's some fixed line.
Yeah.
But really, once you're close to a border, it's really fluid. There's no, so if you're in northern Manhattan, or if you're in northern Manhattan, New Jersey is next door. If you're in the Bronx, Yonkers is next door.
Yeah.
If you're in Queens, Long Island is next door.
No, when I started this project, it was always like, okay, New York City bike culture, but I'm just thinking New York City metro area or like the New York City bike community. And where does that end, right? Does it like, I think it bleeds up into like even the White Plains Crit, I would still call like when it was existing, I would still call it New York City like metro area event, right? Long Island kind of bleeds into Long Island, and maybe not all the way to the Hamptons, like in terms of New York, but those people come to New York City races, and then it certainly goes in New Jersey. And how far like Somerville, that feels like a New York City almost event still, but it's certainly New Jersey really more so. But somewhere there is the border probably, right? So anyway, so that's kind of the mentality. And you.
So actually, with that and tying in that, one of the things I did with the book was I would tell people what subway lines they could take to get there.
Yeah.
So that way they can just carry their bike on the subway.
Keep in mind that not everyone gets to ride 100 miles on a Sunday.
Or that they don't have a car.
Right.
Which is
the big New York City thing too, always, right? Yeah.
So to think of it that way, and so yes, to me, Somerville could be New York because you can take the train to Somerville.
Yeah, right. And anything that's on the train line is New York City, eventually.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken the train to a lot of bike races. I've taken it down.
A lot of people do that. I think especially to those Somerville races. I see a lot of those around Western New Jersey. Yeah.
So that was the thing, and it was really geared towards beginners. I did put a couple longer rides in, but it was mostly finding ways that people could get into bike riding. I think that, and I'm working on it. So the digital version, which I'm doing now, one of the things is, how do I put it? It's making it feel that it's easy. Like we have Strava and Map My Ride, and I use all those. But one of the things that drives me crazy, and this is a personal thing, and I already had the book, so it's not like I did it because of that. But when I look at Strava maps or I download something and Map My Ride, I have no idea what I'm getting into. It's a line on a map, and I don't know the quality of the road. I don't know if it's a highway or a path. I don't know if there's any food anywhere. And also they have all these starting points. They don't tell you why they're starting there or you can find, like I had this thing, granted it was a couple years ago now, but I did a Map My Ride thing when I was in Florida visiting family, and I was riding, and the ride's supposed to go straight, but there's a driveway and then grass. And it's like, wait a second, what happened here? And I go around, and my computer keeps telling me, no, go back. And I'm kind of stuck what to do. And then some guy on a cruiser rides straight through the driveway onto the grass and goes like another 100 feet. And then he goes off the curb, and then the path starts there. And when you go and you look at these things, it's hard to tell. So that having something,
there's a thin straight line on Map My Ride or Strava, and same with Google Maps. I mean, I would. From a cyclist perspective, I would probably give Google Maps a C- right now or something like that in terms of like.
It's improved.
It's improved. It's better than it used to be. Like, but it's got a lot of ways to go. I think I've definitely used it for some routing and roads that are connected aren't really connected in real life or don't exist So, but again, understandable. Right. It's different from a cyclist perspective, right?
Right. So anyway, with that in mind, it's basically making a way for people to easily do a bike ride without thinking, oh, where do I go? What do I do? So for a lot of the rides, it's like, oh, this is near me, or oh, I've always wondered about Randall's Island, or I've wondered about the Rockaways, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And then when I'm growing the website is I'm doing wormhole rides in Jersey, which we had talked about, and then also rides in Westchester, and I'm trying to think what next. It's filling in more rides to give people.
So this is all on our website.
Yeah, all on the website.
What's the name of the book?
It's Where to Bike New York City. So wheretobikenyc.com.
Wheretobikenyc.com. Yeah.
And this is one of the funny things, and why I'm doing a lot of SEO work on the website right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I don't have a publishing company behind me. I'm not paying it. So I'm
search engine optimization, I believe.
Right. Yes. Search engine optimization. So Where to Bike New York City is a pretty good URL to have, I would have thought.
Sounds like it, yeah.
But when you just type in Where to Bike New York City in most search engines, it's on like the third page.
It's not bad. but it, yeah.
So I'm trying to reverse that.
Yeah. Oh, the third page. It's not the third link.
Right. You need it to be you want it to be on the first page, ideally in the first three. But there's this.
Everybody else is talking about.
To me, it's frustrating because we talk about democratization of information, but essentially, if you have a big enough budget, you can game the algorithm, no matter what it is. So, the person who had the store in the alley is just as worse off today, if not even worse, than they were before the internet came along. Because you can't find things.
Because money still rules. Yeah. I don't want to make this too political here now, but absolutely, yeah. So, but the website exists, and we can get more people there, which would help too.
Yeah, help me a little. But it also would help people ride.
Absolutely, and those routes are like, so you said a little bit more beginner, so some people are looking to get into riding a bike, which by all accounts we have a lot of in 2020, and with more weather coming and the pandemic still looming, vaccines coming, we're probably going to hopefully have a big year in terms of cycling in 2021. And these are like them 10, 25 miles, somewhere in that range?
They vary. I have them as short as a mile. For the Where to Bike Here for the book, it was as short as a mile and as long as 45.
Okay.
And then for the rides that I'm adding, I'm generally adding longer stuff. So, I mean, there are a couple 30 and 40 mile rides. Most of the stuff is closer to 50 and 60.
Mm-hmm.
A couple, I've got a 75 and an 85
Yeah.
miler. So, which, you know, for the people who are probably, let's see, so for people who are beginners or riding with their kids,
Yeah.
I'd say the original stuff is more probably what they'd want. And then the newer stuff is more for the people who have already ridden to Nyack a bunch of times. They're like, do I want to ride to Nyack again?
Which, depending on where you start, Harlem is like 50-mile return ride, maybe.
It is, yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
That's a pretty good ride.
Right. I mean, the way I see it, that if you're coming from Brooklyn, getting to New Jersey is an hour, probably a little more.
Yeah.
And so even if you do an hour in Jersey, you still that's a 4-hour bike ride.
Yeah.
So it becomes a different sort of commitment. I mean, I have.
And you're talking 70 miles an hour. Or
Right.
Yeah.
So,
traffic.
So, anyways, and then I mean the same thing with Westchester, which is that I started going up there out of necessity several years ago when the bridge was closed because of ice.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I gotta learn Westchester.
Yeah.
And I used to be a map guy. You know, you buy a map, you stick it in your pocket.
Yeah.
I actually miss that. You know, people, you can say that the bike computers and phones and having the apps are great. The problem to me is that you lack perspective, which is you don't know how far it is really, and with
follow
all
the little arrow on your bike computer. Yeah.
And you're not looking around. You're just like, oh, geez, what is the arrow telling me?
Yeah.
And I don't like that kind of riding too much. You know, if someone can help me get there, like this is the way you're going, that's good. But so I spent a lot of time several years ago getting lost in Westchester, and
Which is easy. Yeah.
very easy. I don't like it as much as Jersey by and large because the roads are narrower and seem to be in worse condition.
And traffic's just as heavy, if not heavier, I feel like.
It feels heavier,
Yeah.
or at least it feels faster.
My limited experience, exactly. It feels fast. The few times I've ridden there and off a bike path, it has not been pleasant. So, yeah. But again, I this is my limited knowledge, and I think this is what experience a lot of people have, and then they shy away from riding there because that's the experience they have initially, right?
Yeah. So I found, and I put up on the website, I got on Sunday. I went up to Pleasantville, which yes, I had to ride through Yonkers on the way out and the way back.
Yeah.
But the way out,
a little bit more urban then, So.
But the way out's actually, once you get to Ashburton, is pretty good.
Okay.
And then on the way home, I frequently take Webster Avenue, which it's simple is the advantage. There are prettier ways, but they take more turns. So
that way you just follow the street.
Right. It's one.
Which is always nice, right? Especially if you don't want to look at the computer all the time.
Right. So it's it's the end of the ride. So you're like, well, I want to get home anyways. This one street goes all the way to, runs all the way to like 145th or something. So you can very easily cross back into Manhattan afterwards. So, so I've been doing a lot of that, and I'm still building my knowledge base in that. There's some places in Ossining, and there are some places between like the Kensico and Pleasantville I have to figure out, and some other things sort of outside of White Plains that I kind of want to get better at, but I'm getting there.
There's a lot of groundwork you have to do. This is a lot of riding around trial and error, like take this road, take that road, or this is a good road, and you take a mental note, or you have like a little like pen and paper little you pull out, and you're like this take whatever XYZ avenue or thank you.
Well, these mapping bike computers have helped because what I do for the most part now is I kind of, it's not like the whole ride is new, much of it I know. And then I get to a certain point and I say, okay, I am going to go left when I went right or left when I went straight. And I kind of try to figure it out in that way so that the whole ride isn't spent looking at my computer or pulling out a map. Wish I could pull out a map. And so that's been, it's been tougher because of the pandemic, only in the sense that I feel like I need to be home more. But when I go out, the flip side is that Westchester, and I think we saw this in the spring, like the parks, all the parks in the area were so much more crowded this year. Right. And there's this place I go by outside of Tarrytown that it used to be empty there on the street, and there's a trailhead there, but now the trailhead is packed. There'll be like 30 cars there. And when I went up on Sunday, it was below freezing, and there were 25, 30 cars.
Yeah, because people want to get out the house and they want to walk around somewhere where they feel like
they don't want to go to the
space.
mall.
Yeah, exactly. They can't go to the mall. They don't want to go to the mall.
You're gonna walk outside.
Yeah, which is great, right? In a lot of ways, but.
So
there's plus and minuses to this.
So yeah, I'm doing a lot of that, and or whatever. That's been one of my projects, I'll say. And learning
it's a huge project. Yeah, I don't know if you have an encyclopedic knowledge of it all, but I'm sure you could take people on pretty good rides around there now.
I'd like to think so. I mean, Jersey I'm much better at because since I started about 30 miles from here when I'm riding regularly, that I sort of have that basis plus. So. I mean, there was a joke a couple of my friends had, which was like, "Oh, we're going to Albany today," kind of thing. And the roads twist and turn so much that, like, sometimes you think you're going south and you're going north. It's like only a couple places where, like, either A, you can see a long way, which is really hard because there's so many trees, or there are road signs that say, "Oh yeah, you got to go this way." Yeah. But otherwise, it feels like it's vast.
Yeah.
And that's fun. So yeah, that's the anyway. It's one of the professional or obsession things in my life right now.
Yeah, you can combine the two, right? I mean, you do research for a project, but it means you have to be out on your bike and ride it and ride it quite a bit.
Right.
And I guess unlike me, who I've made my peace with always going out on a W and then maybe a little bit here, a little bit there, different. But because I also only do it once a week, and then. There's a group, and then I have people to talk to, and then it's just the go-to. That's why I think it becomes the go-to for everybody.
Sure.
And being in southern Brooklyn, I think it's probably a good idea. And there are the routes. I don't want to point to that.
Sure.
Depending on what you're into.
Come someday. When
I
this
should.
is over.
I really need to. I need to because with a knowledgeable guide or downloadable route, it's a lot easier because like I said, I kind of made my route and in retrospect, I definitely don't want to ride that road ever again. Kind of situations when I went and did it a couple of times. But it was a good experience, and you get a different. Yeah, it does feel differently a little bit, and it feels different in the city. It feels different in New Jersey for sure. Those are the longer routes, maybe.
Yeah.
What's some of the shorter routes that you had in the original one too, like 5 to 10 or 15 miles? You said Reynolds Island or something.
Well, Reynolds Island is like 6 around, but if people are taking
from Manhattan somewhere, starting. Yeah.
Basically, if you start at Manhattan and like 102nd Street East River, I think it's like 6-7 miles. But and so that's kind of taken in. But I mean, for like, I'm trying to think. One that I think is good for Brooklyn people that I don't do much is a Jamaica Bay Loop, which is basically around the Belt Parkway, Broad Channel, and all that. And and
that's pretty much on. Well, a lot of it is on dedicated bike paths.
Yeah,
so it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I have a mixed feeling about dedicated bike paths, which is that they're kind of nice, but at the same time, at times it can feel like the interstate, which is to say that it can be very uninteresting.
Yeah.
And I just saw they're developing basically a way to cross the United States on bike paths or multi-use trails.
Yeah, so like a lot of routes of trails probably.
Yeah, and some of that would be fun, but at a certain point you're like, I kind of want to see towns and people and different stuff. And
that's a good point.
It's like a lot of rail trails around here. It's basically a straight, flat route in the woods.
Yeah, you are in the woods. You don't see anything because the woods are dense usually.
Right.
A lot of these rails failed, and they are dead straight, right? Because they have to be, and they're often also very flat, which is great. But after a while, it really
it's monotonous.
Too. Yeah. Right.
So anyway, I'm trying to think. But anyways, they're all over. I have a loop in Douglaston. There's if you haven't heard of it, there's this thing called the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway in Queens.
Okay, no.
It was the first private highway in America. The Vanderbilts took money and they basically built a highway in the early days of automobiles, like the 20s. And only a small section of it is left, but that's part of a park over in Queens. And you can combine that with some other roads and make something cool.
Okay, yeah.
And, and for actually, since you do some cross, you can go... You can do mountain biking or bike cross riding in Cunningham Park in Queens.
Right, yeah.
And there's a place in Staten Island for that. So they're all over.
Glad you mentioned Staten Island. Doesn't often get mentioned for its geographical isolation, but there's a bridge now going there that you can cross again with a decent bike path, and who knows? Yeah. One day the Verrazano Bridge will have a bike path.
It'd be nice.
or bike lane, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, probably not a bike lane, more like an additional path or something.
Yeah, you can get over the Bayonne Bridge, but when I called the bike shop and I was like, oh, I'm looking into there, they're like, the riding isn't good here, is what they told me. And it's like, well, okay, I'm going to find out anyways. And, there were some...
By the bike shop, you mean there's one bike shop there?
There were two at the time.
I was going to say,
there were two. There might be a third now. But, there's a lot along the water, and there actually are... Yeah, I mean, for beginners, there's stuff. It's difficult because Staten Island has some of the design for car problem that like Florida has, which is that it became rapidly populated after cars were the big thing, and that changed it from a land of farms to a land of suburbs, and they just jammed in the houses and put busy streets in. So yeah, that's been, and I should actually, if I could segue though, speaking of changing it.
Do it.
So one of the things that I've gotten involved in is this thing of change. So I don't want to put it straight on TA, and it's funny, it came about, I've kind of been interested for a while, but it came about because my son is now 13. When he was 3, we were crossing a street by us, and the street was really hard to cross in one light cycle for a 3-year-old to walk across. It's like you had to run, essentially, and kids don't understand why are we running. So I had called up TA, and it should be said that like Transportation Alternatives is
TA, Transportation Alternatives,
right. It's the largest bike advocacy group, city-based bike advocacy group like in the world. It's huge compared to what most such organizations are. But even the fact that they're huge, they still basically are there to support people who want to do stuff. So I called them up like, hey, can you do anything about this? Like, oh, I don't know, and left it at that. And then a little while later, they called me up and said, somebody bugged the Department of Transportation to do a study of that road, which is Morningside Avenue, and they have a plan. And are you interested? It's like, yeah. And so basically, I ended up, the street was changed, but it took me going to community board meetings, which is like the idea of a town council, for probably over a year, maybe a year and a half, and working with other people to get like 2,000 signatures and having to fight people tooth and nail. We go through this thing, and I bring it up because I think this is something for everyone. It's like, if you want to ride around the city, it's all well and good once you're experienced, and most experienced cyclists I know are like, bike paths, I don't care, protected bike lane, I don't care. But our spouses or our kids or our friends are like, that kind of looks scary, what you're doing. And part of it is like, well, I guess you're right. And I can't convince them it's not scary. So they have to eventually learn that on their own. And so the community board was very, the people who were running the transportation subcommittee were very pro-car. And so I'd go through this thing, and the person who was the one was the head, like, well, it was in Harlem.
In Harlem, they were pro-car?
Yeah, it was a weird thing. And so they'd say, this is a good idea. And they'd say, well, Harlem is really a very pro-car community kind of thing. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. And I did more research, and this thing came up again, and it turned out that car ownership in Harlem is lower than it is in Manhattan. It's like 18% of households have cars in Harlem, which is compared to 23% of the...
18 of households?
Yeah, 23% in Manhattan, and then 46% citywide. So she is wrong. It is not. And when I brought this up, so where'd you get this information? It's like, well, you had a study, and the DOT shared it with you. And I also I cross-checked it with other data. I found out that probably about half of those cars are used for work. The other half just sit. And then on top of it, while my community is not a wealthy one, at the time the income was like, household income I think was $35,000 a year. Where I am in Harlem, to own a car could cost you a minimum of probably like $6,000 a year. So the people who are saying it's pro-car are the haves, and it doesn't reflect.
I was just going to say that.
That everyone else.
Back at money again.
So yes, back at money. Which of course you could say back at Darwin, it's back at sex.
Right, exactly.
But anyways, the point being that there's some community boards, like on the Upper West Side, where they're pretty supportive of bike stuff. Like I went to a community board meeting once for the Upper West Side, and the typical thing at community board meetings in Harlem is the DOT representative comes, and like his job is to get yelled at by the community board. Like, oh, we didn't want that, the traffic calming measures. Oh, we don't want you to slow down the lights.
Right.
And I go to the one on the Upper West Side, and they're like, why haven't you done more for bikes?
Yeah.
Why haven't you done this? And it was funny to watch, but
that must feel bizarre for the representatives from the DOT.
Yeah, well, they're used to it.
Based on
yeah. And anyways, so it becomes this thing of that if you want to see your neighborhood, if you think that there are ideas, I don't think every place needs a protected bike lane.
No, I agree with that.
Right, but the thing is, there's probably something that can be done in your neighborhood to make it safer.
More bike friendly, whatever.
Yeah, more bike friendly, whatever. Yeah. More conducive, and go out and if you see it, make it happen. So whether that's getting a bike rack in front of your building, or hey, I'd say getting your getting bikes into your office building, putting a bike room in your office building, or a bike corral somewhere. I mean, I'm still trying to get bike racks for both my kids' schools, and the city because of the pandemic, dropped bike racks and started prioritizing bike corrals. But I couldn't get the principals to sign off on bike corrals. In one case, because the principal really wants it in the school. And the other case, because the principal, and I can't believe this, like, you would lose a single car parking place for a bike corral. And she did not want to lose the on-street parking for a teacher. And it's like, this is the time. This is the time, people. Kids,
But that's I think that's still a mentality.
It is. Right. So, but there are these opportunities, and it takes. And if you see it, you can't expect the city or TA or anyone else to do it. And I really.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation before. Where it was like, well, TA takes care of advocacy. We don't need to do anything, right? And I think especially, I don't want to only point the finger at the World Cycling Community. I think there's in all parts of the cycling community, there's people like that. We have TA. They advocate for us. It's fine, and they do stuff. And I think there's stuff at the local level that they can't do and can't see, and that can be done, but it doesn't even need TA's involvement.
I mean, I saw,
but it can be a lot of work, as you've said too.
Yeah, it can. I mean, it was interesting. I felt really, I felt good about. I learned a whole bunch of stuff, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I ended up reading all sorts of books that it's like no reason you'd pick up. I read a book called Traffic, which I've got at the remainder table. It was like $3 or something. And it's if once you start looking at traffic issues, like, wow, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But if you're just sitting there, it is not something you would browse for the sake of doing it. And so there's a lot of things that that sort of tie with the book to me, and kind of sensing that nothing, how to put it, everything here pretty much can change.
Yeah. And
being a part of that would be good. And if I can tie it around to other things, I was happy to get the road redesigned by me, which was great. I think it's been a huge success. I don't think there's been any complaints since it went in, but people were fighting tooth and nail before it went in, which is apparently the classic story. One of the TA guys tells me, and it's funny because I heard it in another city, like, there was a fist fight over this.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's a community board meeting and a fist fight? Like, I don't know about that. And then a friend of mine in Memphis, they were doing some bike stuff there, and basically he was like, there was a fist fight over it. So I don't know if passion's getting that inflamed, but once people are into the car culture, they're married to the status quo.
That's the paradigm. Yeah.
And so an opportunity to change that. So if people are, if they want to ride more, they see this thing, there are a lot of small things to do.